The things we were going to cover today, which wound up on the board, was the best post workflow, working with effects shops, and the last two were tied, editing and indie post. So we had a trifecta of with our panelists. So Sue Corcoran was ill, and also Ben Dobbins was ill, and Steve will be here shortly. So why don't you guys introduce yourself for our modest little group here.
All right.
I'm Kirk Nordenstrom. I was an editing teacher for about 10 years at the UW Extension Program and SFI, and freelance editor, and I run the 48-Hour Film Project.
I'm Megan Griffiths. I'm a filmmaker. Made a film called Eden this last year that played at South by Southwest and SIF. It's going to be released next year. Made a film called The Off Hours the year before that. That was a Sundance. And I probably can't talk to those two topics that were most popular are a little scary to me because I'm not exactly the best source for technical information on editing, but in terms of like the creative of post, and that's where I might be helpful. Thanks.
Very good. So do we have a question to start with? Who would like to start the conversation?
Sure. I would actually just you're randomly here. Love to hear like your post-production kind of just workflow on The Off Hours, actually.
Okay. Well, The Off Hours was the movie that I made that I did for a very micro budget, and I ended up sort of out of necessity and sort of out of desire editing it myself. And so, we shot on this 5D project, and so everything was digital, and it was luckily really well set up for me by people who were on set handling the data. So I just was able to come in and sort of make all that. I have an editing background, but that world changes really rapidly. So, like in terms of I don't do it for a living, so it's hard to keep up completely on everything. But I'm familiar with Final Cut Pro and Avid and all that stuff. So I edited in Final Cut, and then just was able to. I guess the biggest and most important thing that we did throughout that process was take it out for feedback. Throughout 4 feedback screenings, 3 of which I think were downstairs at the theater 1 here, but with people that I knew and respected in the film community, and I pulled in and asked their opinion, and then I had one that Dustin Caspar at SIF arranged for me that was all strangers that I didn't attend, that was more like a test screening with people filling out forms, and my producer Lacey went and sort of handled the discussion and asked specific questions. But the reason I wasn't there is not because I didn't care, but it was more because I was trying to remove myself as like something that would make them be nicer to me or like softball it. And so because I just wanted to hear very like what worked, what didn't, no emotional attachment to me. These people didn't know me or didn't care about hurting my feelings. Well, maybe they cared, but I wasn't there. So
how big was that feedback? Like how much did that affect?
A huge. I mean, that was actually the reason I was like, maybe I should volunteer to step into Sue's spot on this panel, because feedback for me is such a huge part of the feedback of the editing process at every stage of filmmaking, from script writing onward. But it's that sort of the way you handle your feedback sessions too. I took a writing workshop in school where we were sort of encouraged to, everybody kind of came in, watched the work, or read the work or whatever, and then the writer kind of just had to sit there and listen to the feedback, the questions and the criticisms without speaking, without defending yourself, without answering anybody's questions. Every time somebody asked you a question about what did this mean in this, you had to put it back out to the other people who had just read it to see if anyone else could answer it. You could kind of gauge consensus on a criticism, and see if it was just like one person who didn't get something, or if it was like everybody. So I always do that in feedback screenings for films when I show the film, and then somebody says like, well, I didn't understand why she didn't do this, and I'd say, did anyone else understand that? And then if I get a lot of like no, then I write it down and try to solve that problem, and maybe some people give solutions, but really just knowing those issues is so huge. And so it's like pulling as much information without like shaming people, like I've been to some feedback sessions where people are like, you didn't get it, like clearly it's this, and so then people just clam up and don't say anything, and I just, it's not useful. So that's my big sort of soapbox about seeking feedback.
So then, once you got that feedback, did you actually go and reshoot, or was it more a question of how you edited it?
It was usually, I actually never reshot anything for any movie I've ever done. It was, because I'm more about like trying to find a creative editing solution. Like Off Hours is a good example of like things that, a movie that was completely reorganized in the editing. And it was completely hacked up too in terms of, it was 130 scenes in the script and something like 85 in the final film. So I think I cut almost 50 scenes out of the film completely, and then the rest were all over the place. So something that was shot and intended for the middle of the film is now the first scene. And like there, if you look at the timeline, it's just like the numbers jump all over the place because it was just a matter of figuring out the flow that worked best for telling the story and introducing.
You shot all those scenes. You shot all those scenes?
We shot all of them, yeah.
Wow.
Probably, I wish I could have cut those 50 scenes out before we shot. Saved a lot of time.
Talk about how you came to that understanding what the flow was then.
It's kind of like I mean, I don't want to monopolize anything, but like it's sort of an instinctual thing coupled with what people were responding to. Like, it's also an ensemble drama, so it was a matter of like figuring out the balance of what characters people wanted to see more and less of, and who people were sympathetic to, and what we could do to sort of alter that in small, subtle ways. And I'm a fan of like having a feedback forum where people sort of write all these things out, and then having like an hour-long discussion about it once people have formulated these ideas, and then sort of like taking. I mean, how you take it is sort of the sort of creative issue of its own. You just have to. Some of the feedback isn't going to be something you want to do anything with. It's just going to be counter to like what you. I mean, somebody told me they thought Eden needed to be much more gory or much more violent, and I didn't like that idea, so I didn't do it. And it was just like that was a creative choice that I made, and to kind of ignore that piece of feedback. But like there was so many other things that had to do with story that really. Actually, there was one reshoot we did for Eden where we shot an insert of a ring because it was a big story element that I wanted to make sure people understood that it was there. So it was like a one close-up, but yeah, so like those kind of ideas, I guess.
I think that's really an important lesson. I think doing the whole feedback thing, especially when you just have to kind of sit there and take it. I mean, when I was in photography school, we put our photos up and we just have to sit at the back and go, oh man, people are not getting what I was going for, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the moment you release it to the world, you can't be at every single screening of that movie, and it's got to stand on its own. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very smart, your feedback of stages. That's a really smart process.
Yeah, and as difficult as it can be, like I was just helping Lynn Shelton do a bunch of them for Touchy Feely, her new movie, and it's hard to listen to people like rip apart your movie or talk about because I always am like, tell me what's wrong with it. It's like, it's great to hear it's good, but it's not helpful. It's like tell me what doesn't work about it, and that's the forum that you're setting up. So it's like you have to kind of expect a lot of negativity to come towards you and be ready to deal with it. But I always say it's like I'd rather hear it from someone in a group of 20 in Northwest Film Forum than read it in Variety or Hollywood Reporter, when I can't do anything about it anymore, So for me, that's like how I rationalize. Like if okay, this is hard, but it would be worse if like it was public and everybody was hearing this and seeing this and agreeing with it,
How far along in post would you be before you'd actually show it to people?
I did it all throughout. I did it with like basically my first rough cut, and then I did 4. So over the course, I did like one every couple weeks.
Because a lot of the Off Hours is visual. There's a gorgeous visual quality to it. I wonder if they were seeing it before it was color corrected.
People have to kind of go in with those kind of caveats. Not mixed, no color correction, music's not final, sort of things.
When you were doing, earlier rough cuts where there's no sweetening, no color correction, and did you cherry pick that critique audience a little more, because it's very difficult to watch a rough cut if you're not
I saved
attuned
the
to
Strangers screening for something that was a little farther along, that was closer. Like I did the same four feedback screenings, one with Strangers for Eden, because it worked, because I just appreciated that so much on off hours. So yeah, the off with Eden, it was like, I mean, because people who aren't in film, and it's much harder to come in and be like, God, I can't hear that person, or like the music's too loud, or it's like that's what their comments are. It's like, okay, well that's going to be addressed. It's more about story and content and stuff like that.
I can fix that.
Yeah, but yeah, so it's like later on show it to them, but like, and then earlier it's like sort of like the closer community. It's like the people I trust the most who are going to like destroy me.
Okay, who I found.
Hello.
Thank you, sir.
Everybody, this is Richard.
Hi,
Richard.
You want to give yourself a brief introduction, Richard? Or?
Sure, I'm a visual effects guy. I don't know much about the film business as a whole, but I do know a lot about visual effects. I've worked in it for about 25 years. Worked on about 80 or 90 movies, all very commercial. I just listened to you actually in production.
Oh.
That was sort of the other end of the spectrum. I'm very used to large budgets, very egotistical directors, and productions that are spiraling out of control.
That's funny. The only difference here is we have small budgets.
Yeah, no, they're not out of control like these are. So that's me.
Okay, very good. Thank you for joining us. So we were talking, Megan, about the off hours, and I think we're really talking about the culture of criticism
Yeah.
and how that can be developed. So I have my own question. Is how, as an indie filmmaker, and this is for all of you, how can you get that thin or that thick skin so that you can be prepared for that culture of criticism?
Exposing yourself to criticism voluntarily helps. Like if you're walking in the room and telling people to tell you what's wrong with your movie, and they tell you what's wrong with your movie, you can't get angry with them or like be offended. That's just like you have to kind of have that mindset. And it's still like I've sat next to other people on productions where they do get more defensive, and it's just like I just don't think it's helpful to get defensive in those environments. So and what I'm trying to get out of it at the end of the day is I'm trying to make my film better, and I'm trying to make it work for more people. So I just need to take into account like what everybody's saying and try not to be off or offended by it. So it's easier said than done. It's not easy or fun, but it's a necessary evil for sure.
Well, it's like developing a callus. Really. I mean, you just
with practice.
Yeah, you just gotta. I mean, not being defensive is very, very important. And even the harshest criticism, if it's a sympathetic audience, even the harshest, what seems to be almost personally motivated, ultimately, its intent is to improve, what's there. So yeah, it's just like a callus. You learn humility after a while, just taking it.
Yeah, I used to, when I first started making movies, I edited with the door closed and never let anyone in. I was just like, it was a big change for me to like start doing that. It was kind of hard, but now it's just like something that I value so much that I like. It's like I kind of look forward to it in a perverse way.
Well, and
Part of your health regimen.
I think it's different for me because when you're delivering for a client, I mean, you're delivering a product. You're delivering something, and they're going to have an opinion. And their opinion, they may be idiots. I mean, realistically, you can give them something. I know fine artists that deliver products that are beautiful, and the client picks it apart, wants something different. They don't want something better. They want something that's not better. And they want you to actually do something stupid. And that's what, in my world, that's what I'm getting paid to do. The client's bidding. It's not, you're doing, I mean, the beauty of making your own film is that you get to do what you want to do. Whether people like it or not, it is what it is. In my world, it's all about whether the people like it. You're doing what you've chosen to do, but not necessarily, the final product isn't necessarily what you would want to achieve, because you have to please someone else before you please yourself. Or they fire you and don't pay you.
So, yeah, I mean, along those lines, I do a lot of, local, really low budget commercial work, just editing. And there are times, the artist in me wants to make the best thing possible, but, I got a limited budget, and I'll just I'll get some feedback, from the client, and they say, we want this, this, and this. That's gonna be crap. And the producer I work with just says, go ahead, install the toilet in the kitchen. That's what we're doing. We're installing a toilet in the kitchen. Yeah. If they want, if they want to shit where they eat, fine, they're paying for it. So, when you're doing client work, you do kind of have to just suck it up, and you don't have the luxury of kind of taking the best of the feedback, applying it. You just kind of have to do what they tell you.
I've definitely been. I have a kind of a blessed existence in that way. That so far I've been able to sort of have control over how I direct that feedback. I know I have friends, and I'll probably walk into a lot of situations like this in my future. But like I have a friend who just went through a really different situation where the feedback that he was disagreeing with the most was coming from the person who was funding the film and who had the purse strings, and so it was a huge power struggle, and ended up in an inferior movie because it's a good movie. It's just not the movie it could have been because it was made by committee and so.
But then the investor would say, well, could it have been made without the investor? So,
yeah, exactly.
So it is the movie it became because of the investor, and both the investor and the filmmaker benefited from it. It may be not the best film that the filmmaker could have or wanted to make, but without that investor, playing devil's advocate, without that investor, maybe that movie would have never been made.
It's true, absolutely. And the flip side of that is if the investor had came on board to do a film, to do this film specifically, and then they wanted it to be something it wasn't from the get-go, that's a problem
That
with
is a
them.
problem. That's a huge
That they need to they need to walk into projects that they it's like everything that this filmmaker, who shall remain nameless, wanted to do was like something that you could see in the original script, and you could see in his previous work, and everything they were trying to do was sort of make it more sort of a broader comedy that it just wasn't what it was originally meant to be. But that said, it is when the deal is made that both people are agreeing to work with each other, and there is going to have to be those conversations, and you're going to have to figure out how to make the best movie out of that situation, and it can be, it's just like, I don't know.
It's always a compromise on certain levels anyway.
Yeah.
It's a team effort. Movies are sort of the ultimate team effort. And you're as good as, I have very bad stories about team effort.
So we're still kind of on the topic of post workflow. We've still got some time left for that. Do we have any more questions about that topic, post workflow? The other topics we can cover are working with effects shops, independent film post production.
On workflow, I'd like to selfishly ask about, I do sound for film, and I'm kind of wondering about your guys' back and forth with the sound team and how that works. Like if you, as you're getting revisions of the edit, if you even bother with sound, or if that's the last step, or, when the sound team gets input, or, issues like that.
I've never really worked on something where the sound team, once production is done, where, the production sound team really has much of a say in anything.
Right.
Because it really does just kind of go into post-production, and there's, a whole new group of people involved.
I guess I'm talking about the sound design.
Oh, the post-sound?
Yeah.
For me, that always goes on simultaneously with like color grading.
Okay. So last step.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to do small stuff as we go, mainly because I'm showing it on these kind of feedback screens. I want people to kind of get a sense of if there's going to be a sound effect here, or if there's going to be, whatever, filling this gap, then it's there just so they don't have to use their imagination as much. But in terms of working with an outside entity and to sort of flesh that out, it lasts a month or two of the process for me.
Mm-hmm.
The best bit of advice I can give is, view your post-production house or your post-audio house as a partner in it. Never go in to it with the attitude that they are your client. Because I worked at Modern Digital for a while, and yeah, I mean, those projects where someone can come in and just kind of, demand things be done their way. These jobs always took way too long and they cost a lot, but if you view your, post sound and, video post house as, partners in it, find out what their workflow is and conform your, output to that. You're gonna save a lot of time and a lot of money. If you, what's that?
Been a lot of headaches.
Oh, yeah. Because I mean, if a project, if you're working with a house that, let's say just Final Cut 7 or, back, ask them what they want. How do you want me to hand off this project? I mean, there are projects I would have to clean up, They would describe their project in very, very glowing terms. It was going to be it's going to be a, wham bam out the door job. But, this project came in, 32 video tracks.
Yeah.
And I had to spend 16 hours cleaning that up, just condensing it down to the necessary tracks, which was 5. It was just a mess. And they ate up their budget on this job just in me cleaning up the file before it even got to color grading.
So is there some value with having somebody with a post background involved in pre-production while you're planning out what you're going to be doing?
It does help because, you see, someone's going to know, what questions to ask the post house, because every post house has their own different, quirks and preferences for handing something off. And, back when I was handing a lot of stuff off to Modern Digital, it seems like every project I was working on was going there for post.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the phone with them constantly, like, how do you want me to hand this off to you? And they are going to appreciate that because, they're dealing in volume. They want to get as much in and out as humanly possible. And the less amount of time they have to spend doing monkey work, the more money they make. And it's going to save you money. And that time is much better spent in color grading, in effects, than me literally going through and collapsing all of your video tracks down to
Spending money on the
reasonable
stuff that shows.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of transcends just that, it's like going into production with the knowledge of what you're gonna have to do throughout post, through delivery is huge, and planning for it, budgeting for it, getting a deliverables list, like a sort of traditional deliverables list, which is like what your distributor is going to ask from you on a domestic scale, and then on an international scale, which is a whole other ball of wax. If you're hoping to get your movie into those kind of markets, it's really good to know because the costs just add up in the end of the day. If you're not ready for them, it can be really devastating. And not a lot of companies are paying for that stuff anymore when they pick up movies, and so kind of having a plan for it is huge. And I think I don't think it's too difficult to get your hands on. And you probably can just type in deliverables list online and get a PDF and kind of have a sense of what you might need.
And again, I mean, making those deliverables is a lot easier and a lot cheaper if you hand over a nicely organized project. I can't tell you how many times, because I have to make the text list version, and I have to make the 5.1 channels, and it's.
You have to make the sound, you have to deliver it with everything, the movie is exactly the same except for the dialogue is gone, all the effects on their own track, all the music on its own track, all the ambience, all that stuff. It's all these things that it's on a indie scale, it's kind of hard to do off hours. We went back later and made a better effects track because so many of our effects were just on the dialogue track because of that's just somebody put a cup down and we got it on the dialogue track, and so it's we had to kind of go back and sort of re-engineer a thing that was required, and but then going into Eden, it's okay, now more knowledge about this stuff, and I can think about that in the mix.
But yeah, I mean, working with your post vendors, just viewing them as a partner in it and asking as many questions as possible. I mean, you're going to be able to put the money, your post-production budget, where it counts most, on screen or in the speakers. It's a lot of anal retentive work. I mean, it's, and you just got to budget the time for it, and when you hand it off, it's going to be the most productive use of your time and money.
You typically deliver OMFs or similar?
Again, it depends on who you're working with.
Yeah.
You just got to ask. I mean, I most of the post audio work I do is with Bad Animals or London Bridges, and yeah, they're Pro Tools shops. So yeah, I give them what they want, which is an OMF file with a very, very detailed track map. So 1 through 8 is dialogue. This is ambient sound. This is
Mm-hmm.
The more you map it out, the better they're going to be able to figure it out and really, do what they do best. Even little things like you're saying, just putting in little sound effects, not that it's going to show up in the final, but you give it to a professional post audio person, they'll go, oh, I know what you meant to do here, and they'll put in exactly the right thing. So, the more information you can deliver in as streamlined a format as possible it's a pain in the butt, but it's worth it. It's totally worth it.
So is the sound designer usually somebody at a post house, or is that someone like a director of photography that's part of the project?
It's going to vary from project to project, but on indie stuff, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be your editor.
Right.
And if you can get someone that's a sound sound designer, get them, because that's what they do. They work their magic. I'm a picture editor. I'm not a good sound designer. I can make the right cut when it needs to happen to tell the story, but
And sound design can go so far in like making your movie feel bigger and richer. And I mean, I keep mentioning the off hours, but it's like specific experience to me. But like in that particular case, it's a quiet film,
Right.
and so a lot of what happened in that movie happened in post, where it's like trucks driving by, and and like the clatter of silverware in the background, these kind of things that sort of like expand the universe beyond like what frame you're seeing, and like kind of imply that there's a whole world. But that was like, it was one of the things that kept coming up in feedback screenings, is that people felt it was like that because that stuff wasn't there yet. So it was like adding that stuff in was a huge part of like making that film work. And in that case, I worked, just to answer your other question, that with Vinny Smith, who also did our production audio, and he just came back on and did our post audio. And then on Eden, I worked with Clatter and Din, which is the post audio house, and they were great too. Yeah, I mean, both situations were actually really good. It was just different scales projects. Yeah.
So another topic that was on the boards was working with effect shops. I don't know what that means.
Probably a good question
Yeah.
for you.
What does that mean?
I'm not sure what that means either.
How
You
to
need to vote on
do
it.
it.
I mean, I think you touched on it when you said, well, from an effects house point of view, when you receive assets from the client, typically the client, and it is a client, in my world, it's a client-vendor relationship. It's always nice when you get the assets in a way you want it to be, but most clients relish being clients. So, so they usually impose their wisdom on you because they've never done this before. So, in that respect, it's always nice to get the assets. I mean, if you want to save money, if this is about saving money, yes, do everything you can ahead of time to make sure that the effects house doesn't have to do any more than that you can't do. And talk to them, make sure you're delivering what they want in the format that they want. But, I mean, other than that, how to work with effects house, I mean, have a clear vision of what you're looking for. I mean, that's probably the biggest problem I run into is people will say, I want a I did Knocked Up. Knocked Up had this drive out to Vegas. They wanted to shoot in green screens because the director the director on Knocked Up shoots out reels. In other words, he loads a camera with 1,000 feet of film, and he turns it on, and then he shoots out that roll. He doesn't yell cut until, well, he doesn't say cut. The operator says they've rolled out. So he'll walk in the camera, he'll talk to the actors, he'll walk back out. He'll continue to roll the whole time, never stopping the camera. Roll after roll after roll. The production manager called me and said, I can't do this. I can't do this on a camera trailer in the middle of the night going to Vegas. So we'll shoot a green screen. So we shot a green screen, and it took half the time, half the film. But so when we get into post, editorial supplied me with all the elements. So they give me the foregrounds they like, they give me the backgrounds they like, and put them together. You go through all the rigmarole, you deliver, they approve everything, they pay you, and then they're doing the DI, they're doing all the color grading, and the director comes in and says, well, you know, these backgrounds you use on this side, I really don't like. They don't have enough cards. You've been through 3 previews. Give me new backgrounds. I mean, whatever you want to do is fine. But what I'm saying is, if you give the visual effects house, in my case, the visual effects house, what you intend to use, it's a lot simpler than the alternative, which is give them something, they do all their work, then you say, well, I don't really like that, I'd really rather have this. And if you go back and forth like that for a while, the bill goes through the ceiling. And it's easy to spend money in a visual effects house.
So I had a question. Is using a visual effects house a viable alternative for an indie filmmaker that their budget's under like 50 grand? You know, because most people are kind of one-man shows, or maybe 3 or 4-man shows where they film it and edit it, do the sound themselves.
Right.
So if you got that small a budget, is that even possible?
Well,
What kind of money are we
it
talking?
depends on what the film is. I mean, if there's a few key shots in the film that you cannot achieve any other way, then yes. A lot of what I do is for safety reasons, for things that are achievable either for budget. I mean, you can say, well, that was a gross example of saving money. I mean, you get on a film that's running at 130,000 a day, like a Knocked Up. If they can do it in a half a day, all of a sudden they've saved what, $65,000, as opposed to spending it. So yes, you can translate that same thing to an indie film, I would think. If you have a certain budget to do a certain thing, and you can achieve that same thing for half the money using some visual effects techniques, then all of a sudden it becomes viable. But that means actually having a good vision of what your film is going to be on a shot-by-shot level, and being able to say, okay, this shot I question, this shot I want to talk to somebody about, this shot I want to see if there's a better way to achieve this, a more effective way or a more cost-effective way. It depends on what it is. Safety stuff, sometimes, you know, a lot of what I do was never intended to be done. A lot of what I do is fixing stuff. And it's not just like microphones, it's like, you know, you flip a car and you can see the rig that flipped the car. It was not on purpose. They have to fix it. If you have that shot, it has to be fixed because it's the key, you know, the best dialogue track, the best performance. We do split screens for performance. So you have 2 great performances, but on 2 different takes, unfortunately. With 2 people, we'll split and put those performances together. So you get the best performance from each actor. And those are nothing. I mean, a lot of this stuff isn't expensive. And if it makes the movie better in the process, sometimes it's viable on almost any budget. I talked to somebody the other day about they had a $100,000 budget. And we're talking about things like adding fires and adding to these wide shots, that if they had to add those fires to the wide shots, one, permitting might be out of the question. There's all these issues that come up that they can't do. Well, they want the fire, but do they just not do the fire because they can't get permitting? Or do they pay somebody, a lawyer or somebody to get them what they need? Do they go to a different location that might be more expensive to shoot at? So aesthetically, often it is viable. It's like any other part of the movie. I mean, do you actually shoot the scene because it's too expensive? Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. If it's an integral part of your film, you integrate that. It's another tool. It's a really nice screwdriver. It's whatever it is. But if it's part of the movie, it's part of the movie. And so, yes, it's viable for. I did an indie film called I can't remember what it's called. 140 shots. I did 140 shots for free. The guy owes me his life, but I still did it for free. And he went to festivals. He did that whole thing, and I didn't treat him any differently than I would have treated any other film. I mean, I treated him differently, but I didn't treat the shots any differently. And he needed those. I mean, he needed them for his movie. That's what his movie was based around. This work, and if it hadn't been there, it would have been a different movie. So, yeah, I think it is viable if that's part of your movie.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's in the production session. Amy was talking about command of vision, and I think that's in order to utilize services like that, you really got to know what
Exactly.
On the indie level, you got to know what you're doing. You need to know where that fire is, and not pull the fix it in post mentality. Even though it sounds like you are the fix it in post guy.
Yeah. I want that reputation
For a prize.
No, that's actually a true. That's actually a very true. I mean, I've actually heard producers say that on multiple times. That's not a fabrication.
No, so, when I hear it around town here on much smaller productions, as an editor, my response now is, why don't you just do your job right? Why don't you get things done right on set? So I don't have to fix it.
I say that all the time. Only I'm looking at it on a monitor when I say it. Why didn't you take that ladder out of there? Was that ladder? I took the headphones off the director that was in a shot and replaced his ear. Why didn't you just step to the side? I don't know. I don't know.
Go ahead. So I have a question for you. So one of the films I'm producing right now, it has very little visual effects except for there's one important gunshot. And we've talked to someone about doing that kind of old school physically. We're actually getting like a little explosive cap. And,
Oh, you mean it's a hit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Giving a gun hit. And how would you? I don't know. Like at this point, with
Squib hits
digital,
are the way to go.
You prefer that over than doing it digitally.
If you can do it real, do it real.
Okay.
Because you know what? You can do it real, but you never know. I mean, the post guys will always tell you, visual effects guys will always tell you can always do it. And they're right, essentially they're right. But they can never, a squib, how much is a squib? I mean, how much is a squib hit? It's nothing. Comparatively speaking, it's nothing. If they can't do it the way they think they can do it, because that's the way it is. Every shot is a new experiment in post land. So if they can't do it, then they're not going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it. So all of a sudden, it becomes a little more expensive. Oh yeah, when we had to do this particle system thing, so that a little bit more. We got this guy doing this hourly. A squib hit, just do a squib hit.
If you do a squib hit, make sure you do it safely with people who know what they're doing.
Don't worry about safety.
It's like, it's like a,
That's a
you
different
can
pan.
interact
Yeah,
with them.
It's a safety pan.
I'm a former AD, so.
ADs are the mean ones.
That's true. That's totally true.
But also with the squib hit, you also get the actor's going to get the reaction out of it that it's like bang isn't going
That hurt.
to get.
Well, I guess, so, I'm sorry, I won't talk about too much about the situation, but the problem is that we only need one. So we have to bring out the guy and like the expense, and it's like you'd be out like in the west side of the
Then
peninsula.
just do this. Which is more expensive.
Oh yeah, I guess, yeah. We should
Price it
talk
out.
to you separately.
As a producer, you would look at it and you could say, okay, on the day, and this is what I do all the time. On the day, it costs this much money. So in post, I get a bid, it's this much money.
Yeah.
And really, if that's what it is, then visual effects is then doing exactly what it should be doing, which is taking care of an issue that needs to happen at some point during the production. And it's more cost effective to do it in post. So if it is, it is. If it isn't, it isn't.
And if you can't afford either, then find a creative way to do it off screen or like without showing the actual hit.
from the
There's
back.
other solutions. You just got to be creative about it. If you don't have money.
Any more questions? Oh, somebody's got a question. We've also got a couple other topics, which is, where's my paper? Editing and indie posts. We've kind of been covering those sorts of things. Okay, here's one. Looks better, Apple or Mac or PC?
I think it's ironic that Pixar uses Linux, but on Intel-based PC machines. But I just think that's ironic.
I'm a Mac guy, but you know, I'm doing the whole Final Cut to Premiere switch
What do you
right
feel
now.
about? Yeah, what do you feel about Final Cut? That's interesting.
Final Cut 10?
No, Final Cut 10.
Final Cut 10, I got nothing
iMovie.
good to say about it.
No, that whole, see, that's why I won't use Apple products, because they do things like this to people. They pull the rug out from under.
I mean, I'm paying $30 a month for basically the Adobe Master Suite, so.
Yeah.
That works for me. To successfully basically transition my entire client base over to Premiere.
And you can run that on Mac.
Or PC.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so you can use Premiere on the Mac.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Adobe's not stupid.
No, they are not.
I don't know these things.
They went hardcore for the Final Cut 7 crowd.
Oh, they partied the day that Final Cut 10 was released. I mean, I have a friend who's top tier tech support for Premiere, and he said literally parties broke out the moment they first started seeing the
It's
first
almost like
tweets about
somebody,
it.
it's not almost like they paid off Apple to do that.
But again, you know, I mean, your editing program is just a tool. You know, if you know how to edit, if you know, basic 3-point editing and learn your tool set, your application of choice, be it iMovie, Final Cut 10, Final Cut 7, Avid, Vegas, Premiere, it's just a tool.
Lightworks.
Never used it.
Free.
Huh?
It's true. I mean, you know, it's like ultimately you're making creative choices, and they're all those programs can.
And all those programs today are better than they were 10 years ago. So
Yes.
anything you choose today, and you look at a movie that was cut on any of those programs 10 years ago, they're all better than they used to be. And so if they can make that movie 10 years ago, you can make a better movie now.
Yeah.
And as long as your ideas are still good.
And the thing is, I mean, I taught Final Cut at Seattle Film Institute for 10 years, and frequently I'd have, people that were PC based at home, and I would steer them towards Avid, and some people that were a little more price conscious, went with either Premiere or Vegas. But what I was teaching in Final Cut, they could just immediately map directly over to Vegas, Premiere, and Avid. I mean, the concepts are the same. You just need to learn the different names of the tools, where they're located.
You find the icon.
Yeah.
And they're all still named after everything you did when you cut film strips on a
exactly.
CVec, which I did when I was in film school, and like hang the stuff in your bin. And it's like it's all the same terminology, and it's all the same.
Well, they've done that on purpose
conceptually the
because
same.
all the editorial departments, and that's why all those terms will be the same for years to come, because it all stems from basic concepts that were all developed in the 20s and 30s, really.
And I think that's, kind of the reason that so many people have been out of shape over Final Cut 10, is that, all these metaphors that have been in use for, 117 years now, basically just tossed out the window. I mean, I literally, I'm an experienced editor, I got into Final Cut 10 and just went, what do I do? I don't even know what to do. And, I couldn't figure out how to stack a video track on top of another, and it was just reinventing the wheel when the wheel didn't need to be reinvented.
Go ahead, yeah.
I have a question. So, I mean, it's like pretty common, like in especially the low budget indie spheres, for people to edit their own projects that they've either also shot and directed, or at least directed. As you talked about the off hours, you edited yourself. How do you feel about that? Like, I'm assuming you didn't.
I didn't. I worked with an editor, Eric Frith, and it was a great experience. Like, I sort of did it out of necessity a little bit because of the fact we had a really tight post schedule, and we wanted to start editing during production. And so, of course, I can't do that and be on set at the same time. So, but it was with off hours, it's like I like the idea. Actually, I had an editor on board who had to back out last minute, and so I ended up doing it on my own. And I didn't have any money to pay anybody. So it was like one of those things where it was necessity, but if I was doing it by myself, that makes the feedback part of it much more important even than it would be if I were working with an editor. Because at least when you're working with an editor, you got two brains in the room, and like you got two sets of opinions, and like you can bounce stuff off of each other, and you can see things from a slightly different perspective. Whereas when you're by yourself, especially if you're also the director and the writer, like you get in a cocoon of like, this is what this works because I think it works, and I understand this world so completely that I feel like everything makes sense. And then you take it into another room with people who are seeing it the first time, and you really find out what is being conveyed and what's actually working. So it's hard. I think that part of it becomes more important when you're doing the editing yourself. But it's still important even if you're working with another editor, because it's still, anyone who's focused so closely on it after the first few weeks is the opinions get a little less important as it keeps going.
You lose perspective after a while. Documentary that I'm working on, I've had like no budget, been doing it all myself, and subject matter that's very, near and dear to me, friends are involved. And it just got overwhelming, and finally, got a producer on board. And the first thing he said was, he's like, "So, are you going to edit this?" And I said, "I don't know," kind of hedging my answer. And he goes, "Let me put it another way. You're not editing this." And that's what I do for a living, is editing. But he's like, "No, you're too close. You will never have any objective perspective on this. Your passion for the project will always override perspective, and you need someone that can, just go, no, that makes no sense in the narrative flow of this. You're just attached to it because you think it's a pretty shot. Get rid of it." So I think, just having someone that can make, those hard decisions. Ultimately, if it's your project, you could say no, kind of put the hammer down and say, no, it stays in. But, at least there is that third-party perspective that's, that has the detachment required to make some, hard choices that sometimes the originator of the project can't.
And I think you just gotta have the idea that you need to be brutal with your own material. You can't coddle things that don't work. I give a lot of feedback on other people's edits and scripts and stuff, and probably the thing I say most often when I watch rough cuts is take a really critical eye to every one of your actors and help them out, because there's a lot of performances that are mediocre in movies that could be made to look a lot better, even if you don't have actors who are delivering every moment of every take. You can really help out your actors, and that's something that you have to get brutal with them. You can't look at them as friends and that you don't want to hurt their feelings. You have to be like, what about this? What is ringing false in this film? And you just kind of surgically remove any of those moments by any means necessary. Whether you're having them deliver certain lines off camera, you have them ADR it so that it's a better delivery, or whatever. It's like you gotta, it's like not doing anybody any favors to just be like, oh well, it looks pretty, the acting's not good but it looks pretty, or the acting's great but it's a shaky shot. It's like you gotta find the best, make the best decision for the film itself and be really brutal.
That's also the best decision for them too, though.
It is. It helps everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone wants to look good.
Yeah.
No one and I know a lot of actors, and they don't want to watch a movie and be like, not proud of what they did. And I think that's something that people kind of overlook sometimes. It becomes a lot more of a technical choice, and I think you can make you can solve a lot of problems in your edit if you just look at things in a specific creative way. And that was, and you asked earlier, when you take feedback, what you can do with it, and how you can go solve those problems. And one of the other things that I realized that we did a lot of on both Eden and the off hours was, if there was something that people weren't understanding from the story perspective, we would have the actor, do a cut where the actor was off camera and have an ADR line that sort of explained it in a way that fit with the scene. And I'd have the actors like record it on their iPhone and send it to me so I could have it in for the next feedback screening, and then we do it really for the real way later. But yeah, so it's like, you know, those kind of things where it's like, well, I bet if they just heard them, like Lynn Shelton on her new one, that like there's a lot of interpersonal relationships that have to be sort of understood to make the movie work, and so she's like gonna have the actors, you know, off screen say, hey, you know, hey brother, or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, it's like demonstrate exactly what that relationship is. It's like a silly, very small thing that really changes the way people understand the big picture of your movie. So there's lots of creative things you can do in that way.
Can I
And
speak
visual effects too.
Yeah. I shot one project on red, and one of the things I liked about that was I had more of a landscape to work with. So there were times when I did mess up and I missed a shot, I could actually create a shot because I could take a different frame of that bigger space. Because you wind up with 2,000 lines or 4,000 lines. I couldn't do 4,000 on my little Mac, but 2,000 lines, and so you could actually kind of make a new frame. Are there other things like that where, you know, we can take advantage of this higher resolution technology where we can really work it that way? Because I found I was able to do some things with that were just, it was worth the extra money to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys can talk more about this than I could, but I've definitely done that, push-ins and even like digital zooms and stuff like that. Really
And it's
fun.
so nice to have the resolution because you don't lose anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even with the 5D, I did it on the half hour.
Really?
I went in like 40% and never
Really?
had a problem with it. Yeah.
Wow.
And I've seen it on some big screens and it's been fine. So, yeah.
I don't know. I'm, you know, just a traditionalist, I guess. I mean, it's like nail your frame.
Yeah.
It's very, very old-fashioned, and everything I try to do on a production level is just nail the frame, really know it. But there are, I mean, you know, the new Blackmagic camera, if you're delivering in 1080 and you're shooting something that's, you know, 2K or, you know, 2K, you get a little bit of wiggle room, but, you know, you shoot at 2.5, 3, or 4K, yeah, then you really can blow things up a little bit. But I think there's always risks associated in doing it that way.
You never plan to fail. You never plan to take advantage of that 4K frame. I mean, it's nice if you need to have it, but and I don't know what the cost difference is between a red and anything else, honestly, but really, if you look at the whole film like, okay, I'm going to shoot on the red because I might screw up, and then I know,
Yeah.
but if that's the way you're looking at it, sure, you're going to have some advantage, but it's, in a lot of cases, if you took over the course of the production, you could take that camera out and reshoot that frame, that scene, that piece. Even if it was a corner that you caught something you weren't supposed to catch, go shoot a still. And I mean, there's lots of ways to get around little problems like that without having to commit to renting a high dollar package to take advantage of that. But stylistically, if you want to do a lot of post zooms and a lot of that kind of stuff, if you're doing a lot of graphics, adding a lot of stuff like, then it's a different story. But
Yeah.
that's part of your original plan.
It's a stylistic choice.
Yeah, and so you go in there with that in mind. You shoot a certain format because that's the format that works for the show.
Right.
You shoot anamorphic because you want anamorphic. You don't shoot anamorphic because it's fun or easy to deal with. You shoot anamorphic because you want to shoot anamorphic. I still don't know why people shoot anamorphic, but they do.
What's anamorphic?
Anamorphic uses special lenses, squeezes. You know when you see a Clint Eastwood film and he's real tall and skinny?
Yeah.
That's shot anamorphic.
Why would anybody do that?
Because you get widescreen, you get too far.
If you see it when he's looking real tall and skinny, it means they just haven't
And
unsquoze
yeah.
it yet.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, when you see
usually
the credits, it's
usually in the
everything
credits
you
because
show.
they don't unsqueeze the credits or the credits go off the screen.
Yeah.
So, but anamorphic gives you, traditionally, in the old days, and you shot anamorphic because you wanted 2.4 or 2 widescreen, cinemascope. And it gave you the most negative error because usually almost the entire negative when you do it. If you shoot Super 35, you get this little strip in the middle of your, and you're wasting literally half the negative. But anamorphic gives you the entire. Now you can shoot anamorphic red, I'm assuming, and you can shoot. So there's all these new formats that again mimic the old style formats. But when you go into a project, you say, I'm going to shoot this format because of this and this and this. You don't say, I'm gonna shoot this format because I might make a mistake.
Right.
And you don't, you know, it's
Well, I
like,
was thinking of it in the context of post-production, where you are able to take advantage of
It's
the fact
wonderful.
that you have all this information.
it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I get 3 perf stuff, I'll get 1920, 1080 regular HD stuff, and I wish to God it was 185 and I had a little strip on the top and a little strip on the bottom I could then steal from. I mean, I really do. But more and more you're getting nothing.
Yeah.
You're more and more you're getting, this is your frame, this is the piece you have to work with, fix it. And sometimes it's really, really tough.
How different is it really, the editing process of an independent film and a professional film?
I take issue with those two distinctions.
I think you used some bad words there.
I know.
I don't think the editing process itself
I
is any
think
different.
low budget versus big budget.
I don't think the process is any different. You're taking the assets that come from the production and you're putting them together in the best possible way. The process is the same. There's less money involved in one than there is the other. And you have less lattes and you have less time spent in a $1,000 an hour DI suite. But I don't know. I mean, you're making the same creative decisions.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same as production itself, which is, you know, you're trying to create the same product no matter how big the budget you have. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of times you have less to work with than you want. I mean, I think almost every time you do anything. But you know, you're trying to work within. It's good to work within parameters. You know, like it's good for people. And I personally, like, you know, in post, I try to run this. I had much different post budgets on the off hours in Eden, but it was really similar. Like the experience was really similar. But I also had a lot of sort of friends and creative capital and stuff like that to use up on the off hours, and so I had a lot of people who knew what they were doing, who were also working on the movie. But I learned some lessons.
So like the equipment is the same?
Well, yeah, don't you think that production takes a bigger hit on a low budget than post-production? I mean, in terms of editorial?
Probably, although until the end of the
When you
line,
get into the expensive stuff.
when you hit the mix, the sound mix and the color correction and stuff.
The editorial
that's
process
editorial
itself.
itself, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's pretty similar.
I mean, you don't have 3 assistants.
I worked on Final Cut Pro both films, and so yeah.
Well, it seems like, honest to goodness, audio mix and sound sweetening and, color grading are often, its potential to enhance the movie and just, its impact on the budget is overlooked. I don't think people budget enough time or understand, is editorial often gets lumped in with post-production. It's, it seems to be a common perception that it's the same thing. And, most editors have a lot of tricks up their sleeve, but chances are your editor and your motion graphics and special effects person, visual effects, are going to be different people. It's radically different skill sets, and it's hard to find that all wrapped up into one person.
Mm-hmm.
And people make the assumptions like, oh, well, he's got Final Cut and After Effects. He can do everything.
Well, and it's really hard to put that expectation, like as like talented as like this guy Vinny Smith, who some of you may know, is who's done the post sound on all Lens movies and on off hours. Like, he's really good, but he's one guy, and like we're still giving him like this. He had the same amount of time on the off hours as I think 8 people had at Clouder and Dan on Eden, and it was segmented into someone who's doing dialogue editing and someone who was doing the Foley work, 2 people who were doing the Foley work, and then all this stuff that was happening, and then composers working separately and feeding that in. It's like Vinny's like one person running a shop that would traditionally be a great deal more people. So it's like a lot of expectations on one person and a lot of different skill sets that you're expecting that person to have. And it's tough.
Yeah.
On them. Some of them can deliver, but it's still it's a tight thing to do. And something that just kind of made me think of, this is a little bit tangential, but the idea of like the festival submission thing, and how far to take something before you submit it to film festivals. I don't know if anybody's interested in that as a topic, but it brought it to mind because it's something that I think rough cuts are submitted all the time with sort of temp effects, and and music and uncolor corrected, unmixed, and I'm a person who is an advocate for finishing your movie before you submit it anywhere. And I think, especially when you're a new filmmaker and the people you're submitting it to have never seen anything you've done before, so they don't have any gauge to know how you're going to finish your movie. They don't know what kind of perfectionist you happen to be, because people are different. Directors put there's a huge range of effort people put into the last stages of a movie. And film festival programmers will say they look at rough cuts, they will accept them, and the people at Sundance say they rarely see anything but rough cuts. But it's like, I think that it's important to like put your best foot forward and really take it all, even if it means missing the Sundance deadline, or some other big festival deadline. I just wanted to put that into this discussion since it seemed relevant.
No, I mean, I can't imagine giving somebody an incomplete product.
I mean, it happens 90% of the time, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you talk to, when I met some of the programmers at Sundance, when Off Hours was there, I mentioned that I had submitted finished film to them, and they were like, wow. I can't remember the last time I saw a finished film, because they don't actually rewatch it either when you play at the festival, unless the programmers are running around introducing movies all over the place. So it's like that programmer is probably never going to see your movie.
And so I was curious, with the Off Hours, which was your first film, right?
It was my second feature, but there was a big 8-year gap between my first and second.
And it was basically a very small budget. Where did you come up with your budget for your post?
We didn't really have much of one at all. I did a lot of, the DVD, which, actually I have one with me, I will show it to you because it was I say it was completely handmade by me because it was, I edited the movie, I edited most of the special features, I designed the DVD, the menu art, I formatted the DVD in DVD Studio Pro, and I designed the box and the sleeve for it, and I sent it off and got it manufactured somewhere else. But everything on this is something that I had to do myself, and it was because I'm free for my own projects, obviously. Whereas so I didn't have to go to anyone else. I had to just teach myself all this stuff,
And so then my follow-up question is, I know that, it did well in festivals and it's had a lot of circulation. Was it picked up by a distributor?
Yeah, I mean, we have distribution. It's available on Netflix streaming and on many other digital platforms, and it didn't have a big theatrical release. It was picked up by Film Movement. It's not, from a lot of angles, that movie is not a success story. From a personal angle, it's a huge success story. It's helped me get somewhere else in my career. It's helped a lot of other people who worked on the film get somewhere else in their career. But from a financial standpoint, it's would be considered, if not a failure, close to it.
Did you make enough money to pay to break even with it?
Not yet. We're still selling foreign territories, and I mean, considering how low the budget was, it's kind of a scary thought. But yeah, I mean, we're kind of inching towards that, because obviously we want to repay everybody.
And so after the success of that, if not commercial, but artistic and everything else, is that how you were able to get funding to do the next one?
I actually was so happily not part of the fundraising process on Eden. It came to me as a funded project, although much lower funded than what it ended up being. But Colin, who was the producer on Eden, had worked on the Off Hours and was impressed by what we'd done with our resources and the subject matter, and he asked me if I'd be interested in working on Eden when it was like a $300,000 movie, and it turned into a bigger movie than that. But I was willing to come on board at that level, and so I got to rise with the budget, which was great. So yeah, but I hate fundraising. It's the worst part of filmmaking. So it's necessary. It's important to have a knowledge of it. I had a little bit of a business 101 kind of when we did the whole. We tried every different model of fundraising for the Off Hours over the years, and it was a really unpleasant 5 years of my life, but you know, it's like, you know, I would happily never do it again. If
Did
I
that
could still
include
make
like
movies without doing it.
Kickstarter?
We actually did a Kickstarter. It was like it was right when Kickstarter was brand new and we made the off hours, and so we actually did a little $5,000 Kickstarter, and it was very helpful. That little chunk of change.
Right.
Thank you for the shirt.
Yeah. we did good swag. We rewarded people, and it's actually awesome because it's shown up everywhere since.
Yeah.
At any set I visit, I always see an off hour shirt being worn by one of the groups or something, and I'm like, yes.
Is there a standard percentage range for the film's total budget that might be devoted to post sound, or is it kind of all over the map?
Oh, that's a producer question if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, I don't know.
Fair enough.
No idea.
Okay.
Do you think like in an indie film that post-production could be even more expensive than just shooting? Is that even possible?
I guess it depends on the scope of the production itself.
'Cause I do see a lot of indie films, they'll begin and they have a Kickstarter, and it's like, oh no, now we have to have funds for post, and so there's another Kickstarter. So I'm just assuming they didn't budget enough
Yeah.
for post. Is it that significant?
Well, I mean, it's a significant. I mean, the example that popped to mind with your question was the movie Monsters. You guys seen that film? It's
Is it a cartoon?
It's a sci-fi monster movie that was shot in Costa Rica with a crew of 3 and a cast of 2 professionals, one of which was an actor that worked in the off hours, but the rest of which were locals who they sort of got performances from, not actors. But that movie was shot, I'm imagining, for a very low initial budget, but the guy who directed it was also, he comes from a visual effects background, so he took it back and created pretty impressive visual effects I mean, I don't know what they spent on that, but since that was his world, I think that he was able to do that for a small amount, but like the result looks expensive. And but they went down with like a camera and 5 people basically to Costa Rica for, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks.
Another good example is the movie Undead. Just 2 Australian filmmakers. You know, if you want a crash course in DIY filmmaking, these guys did it. The movie is hilarious if you're a fan of, you know, Evil Dead or, you know, Shaun of the Dead. But the DVD extras, it's like film school in one box. I mean, it's fantastic. They, you know, did everything themselves using, you know, they taught themselves every bit of software they could, and so their budget for post wasn't very big because they did it themselves. I don't think they will ever do that again because I think it almost killed them. But you know, they learned a lot about it and they were able to, you know, definitely leap much further ahead in their careers as a result of it. You know, said, okay, we need to hire people to do this because this almost killed us. So,
Well, it's the time is money thing. If your time has no real value, then you can do it inexpensively. If you don't have a job, if you don't have something else going on, you're the best resource you have. You can get stuff done for free that anybody else would probably charge you for. So knowing your tools and knowing how to use your tools, knowing how to get the job done yourself is always going to be the way to go. It takes more time, it takes more effort. I know people, it costs them their families and their credit card, you know, their credit ratings and everything. But that's a great way to do it if you have that in you to actually do that. But not everybody can do that. It's a
Does it also
personal.
help when you have to communicate to someone who does that job if you've actually done it at some
Yeah.
level, even at a basic level, where you can communicate with them about what I need in this cut, what I need.
Right,
in
but
this
anytime you
cut.
bring somebody else in, you have to compensate them in some, okay, you don't necessarily have to, but generally speaking, they have to be compensated, even from a personal satisfaction point of view. They have to be compensated for that lump of their life you're taking. Because they're not working on their own project, they're working on your project. So the only reason they're doing it typically is because you asked them to.
And I was thinking more in the long run, like, if you know how to do these things and you get to a point where you can pay somebody,
Yes.
the fact that you've done it makes that conversation go a lot easier.
Sometimes, yes.
Any more questions or thoughts? I got one. So what's an area that you see that independent filmmakers in Seattle can improve when they do post-production? Because you guys see quite a bit of it. So if you guys had to name one area.
I mean, I'd just say what I already kind of reiterate what I said, which was seek and listen to feedback from others, because I think that's a lot of people like edit in a cave and emerge with something finished, and then they never run it by anybody. And it's important to put it in front of other people and see if it works. So I think that's something that could happen more.
My big thing is, just owning a piece of software doesn't make you an editor. If you want to be an editor, watch movies constantly, and learn the tool inside and out. I talk to editors all the time that never learn keyboard shortcuts or even just some of the more advanced editing tools. Like, oh, well, I just do a ripple edit here. They go, what? What's that? And they're getting paid to be an editor, and they don't know what that tool is. I mean, that's just 101. That's like, you don't paint unless you can learn to draw. Learn the tools, because when you get, when you really get the tools down, all of a sudden there's a shift from all this left brain problem-solving thinking to you don't have to think about that anymore, and you're working strictly on the on the creative side of your brain, and you really only get to that level of creativity when the tool set is rote and you don't have to think about it anymore. When you can figure out, when you know how to save 5 clicks to do the same thing, that's an awful lot of, time that your brain has spent thinking creatively instead of and over the course of a week, I mean, you've saved several hours of your time. I mean, learn the tool. If you buy the software and you want to be an editor, do the homework.
So did you say you can get Premiere for $30 a month?
I think you can. Well, Creative Suite right now, they have the Creative Cloud, and it is the best deal in software currently.
That will probably change.
I hope not. I like my deal the way I was going now. I own several Creative Suite licenses prior to this, so I'm getting it for $30 a month. I think the standard for
I think it's 49 or something.
49, which is still great. I mean, you're essentially getting the Adobe
Lightworks
Master
is
Collection.
free.
Lightworks.
I mean, they cut what? Hugo was cut on Lightworks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Again,
It's got the Mission Impossible was cut on Lightworks. It's a real program.
Yeah, but I
Bruce
can't.
Almighty was cut on Lightworks.
Interesting. But I can't live with it. I need Illustrator and Photoshop anyway.
Yeah.
I don't feel like my computer is actually doing anything if those 2 programs aren't on there. So I would be paying for it anyway. So yeah, I think it's like $50 a month. And
Well, I think if you're a student, can't you get a break if you're a student?
yeah, I mean, like the UW. I mean, it used to be if you were a student at the UW, you could just buy the video production suite for $300, and
I think
it's
so, yeah.
$300 and it's fully upgradable.
Okay, we're a little early. Do you guys have any further comments or is there any further questions you'd like to come out with?
I got a quick one for Richard. What effects house do you work for? What tools do you use? And are you a digital artist in the trenches, or do you manage a team, or do you own the company, or what's the deal?
Yes.
Yes to all.
I think I own the company. I manage other people when the job dictates. But lately, the job's been small enough that I just do it myself. And you really, the tools are what you need. I mean, it's not, I always say 3D guys always have a 3D solution, 2D guys have a 2D solution. It's like you go to a surgeon, he's gonna want to cut something off your body. If you go to a chiropractor, they're going to want to adjust your back for the same problem. So I'm basically a 2D guy that uses 3D tools. So my solutions tend to be 2D. In other words, manipulating existing imagery is my solution of choice because most of my clients want to do stuff a little less expensively. You get into the big companies, they tend to be 3D companies. They tend to have 3D solutions, and 3D solutions require an army. I mean, you watch the credits on something, and you just, it's scary how many people work on in the visual effects world. I have compositing tools. I use combustion, Autodesk combustion. I'll use Nuke. I'll use After Effects, just depending on what makes sense for the show. And like he says, you know your tools, so you know what tool. You know whether you need a Phillips screwdriver or a flathead screwdriver. I mean, the tools are very similar, but they have strengths and weaknesses. You pick the tool you need for the job. I mean, anything. I use Blender. I mean, I teach at DigiPen, and it's a video game school. They use Maya. They use mostly Maya and Studio Max, 3D Studio Max. And I always say, I use Blender, and they all like Blender. They just don't use Blender because they have Maya sitting there on all the school machines for free. I don't use Maya because I have to pass that $4,000 program on to my clients, and they don't want me to. So I can get the same results out of another tool, so I use the other tool. So yeah, it's like working on a car. You pick the tool that works. If you don't have that tool, you use vice grips. But generally, you try to use the right tool for the job. And thus, you end up having piles of software because there's always something new that's better. I hope that helps.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I still have Final Cut 7 sitting on my machine. I've opened it twice and kind of went to Final Cut 10, but now I'm running Premiere, and it's working great for me. It's working, and I'm like sitting on a copy of Avid Symphony that I won at NAB this year, and like no one's bid on buying it. So I'm just like, screw it, I'm getting a new computer and I'm just gonna put Avid on it, and I'm gonna have, basically all the video editing software out there. And then maybe just for grins, I'll save up my pennies and get a copy of Smoke as well, just so I have all of them. Avid, Adobe, Apple, and Autodesk all on one machine. Who knows?
So I just have a question. All the visual effects, are you using that more in the gaming world? I mean, I guess that's mostly where it's being applied.
I mean, visual effects, well, that's not really true. Movies are now made strictly around visual effects. Look at Michael Bay. His movies suck. If it weren't for those big metal monsters running around, he wouldn't have a movie. So, visual effects productions on the high-end movies, the budgets for the visual effects are larger than the budgets for production. They're $40, $50, $60 million just for the visual effects budget. Gaming's a little bit differently because most of the gaming effects, unless you're talking about the interstitial video portions, those are all real-time effects, and those are all dictated by the gameplay. So depending on, but because they have to happen in real time, they're approached completely differently. The stuff I do is definitely not real time, and so yeah, it's a different world. I mean, it's amazing what they can do real time, but what they do is they have a real time effect they want to achieve, and they write software to achieve that in real time. They probably make compromises along the way, edge softness, blurriness, stuff that takes a lot of processing time. They'll compromise in certain areas. As long as the look is close enough and your brain is saying, okay, that's what it is, they're okay. For film work, there's no such thing as compromise. I mean, there's compromise but the compromise in the film world all happens at the script level. once they get to post, if they had put the scrutiny into the script that they put into the post-production work, any sound, editing, anything, you name it, but if they put that same scrutiny into the script, you'd have nothing but blockbusters. Or even nothing but good movies. But they come with a weak idea, and again, not always, but typically. Come with a weak idea, you shoot something, and then you get into post and try to piece it together, and then it doesn't work, so then you add visual effects, because that fixes everything. And then you release it, and then it gets panned, and it doesn't make money, and you got a John Carter. And then it's like, well, the visual effects were no good. Yeah, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but that's not the problem. So if you have a great script, that's what you want. You want a great idea, you want a great concept, you want a great idea and take that script. I worked on this movie called 8 Heads in a Duffel Bag, which was not a great movie.
I love it.
The script was fall out of your chair funny. It was hilarious. I'm sitting in my living room reading it, laughing out loud. It was hilarious. The director was the writer. He didn't get it on the screen. He just didn't. It didn't. I don't know what happened. He just didn't get it on the screen. And so, but the script was phenomenal. So it's a process, and if you don't. If somebody drops the ball at any point during it's hard to pick it up again, really.
Yeah, and just another angle on your question is that I think there's a lot of movies out there that have visual effects that you don't even recognize are visual effects. And you mentioned having, seaming together,
Yeah.
two different sides of different shots, and like we talked about digital zooms and push-ins, and like we erased certain things from frames of Eden, or or whatever. It was just like all these little car green screen driving shots, these kind of things that hopefully you don't notice.
Fail.
Yeah, exactly.
If they see it, you fail.
Yeah, we had probably 25 effect shots in Eden, which, and I bet you people would think maybe one or two, because and it's just because it's like solving issues, or
Fixing
there's
things.
all sorts of reasons to use it beyond.
It's like ADR.
Video game
It's like
style.
visual ADR. I mean,
It
really.
is, yeah.
You got a little issue, you got a little problem, you got a little glitch that, even stuff like, we used to fix film scratches, because you'd have something in the gate, you'd have a scratch in the film, but that's the take. That's all you got. It happened one time. You go and fix the scratch. It's so often it's fixing. That's sort of what visual effects should be. In my opinion, it should be something that augments the production. You start creating characters, and you open a whole new can of worms. And whether that's a good can of worms or not, I'm sort of up in the air on.